of evolution, struggle, suffering, and pleasure, mankind, the supreme goal of Mother Nature, came into existence. Man was realized to differ from animals only by little, and in the course of human history it became evident that most men threw that little away. In turning back the pages of history, we see struggle and war, famine and disease, carrying away whole nations and races, lovers of humanity sacrificing their own lives that others might live. All things change. They are born, mature, grow old, and die. Though life is short, bitter for most, sweet for a very few, men have sought to shed happiness and love over all throughout the ages. Paternalism is that very love for humanity, manifesting itself through the unselfish association of men with men, not for the sake of glory and fame, but for the sake of the love that exists between men who think more of their brother's welfare than of their own. One such man is William Brodie, whose organizing zeal was largely responsible for the formation of Sigma Alpha Rho Fraternity over 50 years ago. Founded November 18, 1917, this small one-chapter fraternity has grown to become the largest independent high school in the world. Looking back to his student days at West Philadelphia High School, William Brodie recalls a popular social club and the chain of events that finally led to the formation of Sigma Alpha Rho. It was the second decade of the turn of the new 20th century and the end of World War I. By the spring of 1917, the Zoatrical Club was established by a group of Jewish students for the purpose of banding themselves together socially. The name was derived from a combination of the words social and athletic. By September of the following school year, the Zoatrical Club began meeting on a regular basis and included in its membership students who were active and prominent in school affairs. Among them was its president, Jules Feinstein, who was to become the first chapter president of Sigma Alpha Rho. However, despite the club's social activity, William Brodie felt that a Jewish student organization should have more of a purpose than of providing a social life for its members. The high school was situated on Walnut and 47th Streets, and its Jewish students all lived in this section, and if nothing else, they had in common a single tradition and heritage. Thus, on a certain night in the late months of 1917, during a meeting of the Zoatrical Club in a small social hall behind the synagogue on Larchwood Avenue near 60th Street, Bill Brodie suggested that they form themselves into a fraternity. Despite the large membership, only a few of the boys agreed, but one of them was Jules Feinstein, who expressed his enthusiasm to Brodie. At his home on 6116 Carpenter Street, Brodie called together 11 men. Some were not even members of the Zoatrical Club, but all expressed a common desire to unite in a common brotherhood. That night in Brodie's home, a committee was appointed to draft the Constitution and bylaws. Then, ponderous Bill Brodie arose and in his sincere voice suggested that they call themselves the Sigma Alpha Rho Fraternity, and its meaning is now part of their sacred ritual. Jules Feinstein was elected first president, and the following spring they held their big May dance. Jerry Abramson led the one-chapter fraternity for another 2 years, and in November of 1920, Leon S. Rosenthal became their third president and decided it was time to seek a second chapter. During an interview in his law offices, Rosenthal discussed those early years. Realizing the need for expansion, he revised the ritual, and by June of 1921, a second chapter was inducted at Central High School. In September of the same year, an executive council was formed to rewrite the Constitution and bylaws, and within another year, 4 more chapters were organized from different Philadelphia high schools.
We continued as a single chapter organization. I'd say that after a while we had 6 or 8 chapters, and then we decided that we would have to organize your first National Executive Council. And we were off.
By August 1924, 17 chapters had been organized, and the first annual convention was held at the Ambassador Hotel in Atlantic City. Rosenthal was re-elected for his 3rd term, and by the end of his 3rd term, the fraternity boasted 23 chapters, and a national newspaper, the Gleaming Eye, was edited by Harry Butin. Louis Shears, Sam Good, Emil Goldhaber succeeded Rosenthal, and 7 more chapters by 1929 had been inducted. This dynamic growth from 1 chapter to 30 chapters in 8 years was due to the leadership of Leon Rosenthal and his national organizer, Emil Goldhaber, who became Supreme Exalted Ruler in 1927. Today, a federal court judge, Goldhaber exerted a vital influence on the fraternity's expansion. He was an individualist who brought a unique wit and imagination to fraternal policies. As national organizer and later Supreme Exalted Ruler, he inducted new chapters in Camden, Newark, Harrisburg, Petersburg, New York, and many other cities.
We just were interested in expansion. Then we were even so far willing to go across the river to Camden because we recognized that it was deemed by some people to be part of the United States. It was as though we were going to foreign shores. But then, of course, the whole movement began gaining momentum, and wherever we saw 2 Jews gathering together, we made a chapter.
The expansion of the fraternity reached significant proportions when Supreme Exalted Ruler Benjamin Horrow inducted a chapter in New Orleans in 1929 and marked the end of one of the greatest periods of expansion. The end of an era and the beginning of another was further dramatized by the stock market crash in the Great Depression that followed. But the fraternity met the challenge. Under the leadership of Supreme Exalted Rulers Weiss, Graff, Grossman, Solomon, Borstein, Price, Lubar, and Tommy Roberts, who was inducted in 1929 and became Supreme Exalted Ruler in 1937. Today, he is a successful businessman and chairman of the economics department of a major university. Looking back, Roberts feels that inter-chapter relations was the prime reason why the expanding fraternity sustained its fraternalistic spirit. As a result of this, the first Sigma Rho's conclave was held in Philadelphia in 1933, and with the inauguration of the convention plan, the fraternity was now able to present a convention at minimum cost to brothers. Perhaps the greatest achievement in this era was the publication of the 1931 History of Sigma Alpha Rho, edited by Harry Carrington. Considered one of the finest publications ever seen, it was a detailed account of the fraternity's history. 30 years later, the 1931 history was reprinted from what was the only known copy left in existence. But the great task of bringing the story up to date has yet to be done. While the fraternity continued to grow geographically, internal organization was also stressed. Tommy Roberts was elected Supreme Exalted Ruler in 1937 and began planning a convention that every brother could afford. The merits of a $5 convention were considered.
I had as the treasurer on my national board an outstanding young man with whom I had worked, and worked diligently. he and I discussed this, and what has now become the convention plan was paved by the late Irving Rathblot, who became my director of convention.
The first handbook was printed in 1936. In 1939, 300 enthusiastic convention delegates elected Irving Rathblot, who was re-elected for a second term. But Irv never finished his second term. America was at war, and as lieutenant in the reserves, he was sent to the Philippines, where he was captured and later died, still a prisoner. Many Sigma Alpha Rho leaders were drafted. Many active men were forced to drop fraternity work to aid national defense. Some chapters began to induct younger men, while others went inactive. It was a critical time for the fraternity, and when Harold Whitey Weissman was elected Supreme Exalted Ruler in 1944, the great task of preserving Sigma Alpha Rho fell to Whitey and his board. His cry, gung-ho, work together, became the rally. In 1942 and 43, 2 ambulances were donated from the Ambulance Fund, later renamed the Service Fund, for a service rehabilitation program designed to aid in getting post-war jobs, while in uniform, SAR Yanks received the Stars and Stripes, special Gleaming Eye editions. Sigma Alpha Rho has created a well-balanced program for Jewish youth, to include Jewish and cultural affairs, and in addition, major emphasis on scholastic achievement. The basic ideals of the fraternity are stated in the preamble. We, the brothers of Sigma Alpha Rho, in order to form a more perfect fraternity, to establish brotherhood, sociability, honor, and clean living amongst the Jewish youth of our generation and our posterity, to stimulate an awareness of the Jews' enviable heritage, to encourage the Jews' inherent right to live peacefully and honorably among his fellow men.
I would say this, that Sigma Alpha Rho, in my mind, does more to develop Jewish youth, to prepare him to go out into the community life better than any organization that in the world. Our boys get into college and take an active part on campus. They go into a place of leadership. I think that they are really dedicated boys today for charitable work. They go in for a lot of real worthwhile. And with the ambulances, buying ambulances for the service in the name of the brothers who were fighting in World War II, this is what started us on the program of community service. We know for a fact that we are training him for later in life to assume responsibility, to be able to meet adversities. We teach him to accept defeat as well as success. I think there's a lot of things that the fraternity gives which you can't measure in dollars and cents, and this is important. I've had parents say to me, and this is gospel, have said to me that Sigma Alpha Rho has done more for their son than anything that they could ever imagine. And there's no question about what we do with youth. No question about what we do with it.
Over 3,000 Sigma Alpha Rho men served in the armed forces during the war. 35 did not return. On January 20th, 1945, an impressive ceremony in Philadelphia's Fairmount Park, the Brothers of Sigma Alpha Rho planted a young tree and dedicated a stone plaque in memory of the 35 fraternity brothers who paid the supreme sacrifice in World War II, including Irving Rathblot, who was captured in Bataan, survived the death march, only later to be killed. At the 1946 Victory Convention, he was memorialized through a scholarship fund that bears his name, which gives worthy Sigma Alpha Rho men the opportunity to continue their education.
I can tell you a great many things about her. He was tremendously interested in young people. He was an excellent dancer, a philosopher, a poet, a writer, and a very good-looking young man.
The question of the scholarship is probably the greatest thing that ever happened to Sigma Alpha Rho, because it gave us real purpose.
purpose has grown stronger year by year. Since 1945, thousands of dollars a year have been given to worthy brothers toward their college education. During the decades that followed World War II, the fraternity was led by Sigma Alpha Rho's finest Supreme Exalted Rulers. Through increasing publications and inter-chapter relations, the fraternity reached a new threshold. But chapter and national publications were not enough to sustain the prompt expansion. In 1958, with 42 active chapters, Charles J. Bogdanoff was the first of the new breed of national leaders initiating the concept of manifest destiny, and the chapter rolls grew to a magical 50. In 1960, Marvin Spivak led 47 brothers to the first full-scale conclave in New Orleans. With the distance barrier now broken, transfraternal travel became a consistent policy. Under M. Zev Rose, chapters were organized in California, and Supreme Exalted Rulers Eric Solomon and Jerry C. Schaefer continued to make the fraternity coast to coast. But the most significant steps were taken during the terms of Gilbert B. Abramson and Edward Saul. A record 32 groups were inducted, including the crowning achievement of organizing chapters in Montreal, Canada, making Sigma Alpha Rho international. Expansion continued under the leadership of Jeffrey Abramson and Richard Weissman. Weissman's innovations were directed toward laying the foundation upon which could be built a fraternity larger in size and scope. He is responsible for the first filmed history of Sigma Alpha Rho. The greatest aspect of growth is transfraternal travel, highlighted by chapter conclaves. Many will leave for these conclaves by bus, others by plane, and even a few by car, while the trip by car can be a little faster. But day will turn into night, and soon the men will arrive at their destination. The conclave is a place to make new friends and renew old ones. Conclaves allow individual chapters the opportunity to extend its fraternal spirit to visiting brothers, and gives the heart of the fraternity the chance to travel to distant chapters in such areas as Montreal, California, and New Orleans. With the initial hustle and bustle over, now our men turn to registration. A time to get further acquainted with exactly what the activities of this conclave will produce. A time to receive their dates, and a time of just general confusion. The most important conclave in any one year is Sigma Rho's conclave, and the hosting chapter enjoys the privilege of having as guests the presidents of every chapter in the fraternity. This generally occurs around mid-year. But now the Supreme Exalted Ruler arrives, and the Sigma Rho of the host chapter greets him at the airport. And with his arrival, another Sigma Alpha Rho conclave begins. Steps into full swing. Yes, a conclave is many things. And even more significant than a conclave is the convention which unites the entire fraternity in a common effort to legislate international policy and renew friendships. Business meetings, social and recreational affairs combine to join all brothers in one united spirit of brotherhood. Major convention cities are New York, Philadelphia, Atlantic City, Baltimore, and Washington. An interesting way that Sigma Alpha Rho men seem to find their dates when at a convention is by the process known as the Shana Patrol. But the convention is not just for the active brother. It is also for the alumni.
And we in Sigma Alpha Rho are going to have to appeal to our own alumni to pick up this responsibility of endowing in some way, shape, or form the national fraternity. Because unless they receive this kind of money, they are not going to be able to continue to grow. Every Sigma Alpha Rho man owes this fraternity. This is my honest opinion. I told the boys this in Baltimore the other day. Sunday, I told them at that banquet, the alumni, look around the room. The man you're sitting next to, he's your friend. He's been your friend all these years. You made that friend in Sigma Alpha Rho, so you owe Sigma Alpha Rho something. And it's true. I think every alumnus of this fraternity owes this fraternity and will always owe this fraternity, because nobody can ever give this fraternity more than they ever got out of it. It's hard for people to imagine, but your alumni are aware that every one of your alumni will tell you today still his friends, his business associates are still Sigma Alpha Rho men. And I don't care who, how, what, or when.
Of particular interest to the chapter member at convention is the time when awards are issued. They represent the culmination of a year's activity. Over 50 years ago, an organization destined to be the foremost of its kind was founded. Many great men have played a part in its formation and existence, but none had to face the challenge that lies ahead. We have captured the spirit of these early expansion years, but the spirit alone cannot ensure the survival of Sigma Alpha Rho. The future depends upon the determination of its leaders to expand both the concept and structure of the fraternity to meet increasing demands of growth. To form such a marriage of policy in which we grow and maintain is something even our forefathers thought impossible. But what they accomplished also seemed impossible. And some might even say that the task ahead is easy. This is part of the continuing story of Sigma Alpha Rho.
Sigma Alpha Rho did an awful lot for me, because the friendships that I made in Sigma Alpha Rho and made them 45 years ago are the closest friendships that I still have today.
I would say that conservatively, 95% of my friends were at one time members of Sigma Alpha Rho. These were the friendships that were formed early in life, when we didn't have any particular selfish motivations, when there was an altruism, and we accepted a man at his face value.
When you have those friends today, they're the friends who, through thick and thin, through rain or hail or sleet or snow, they're the buddies that you still have today, and they're my close friends today.
How can I explain it? We were made to feel that there is nothing like Sigma Alpha Rho. There's nothing more important in your fraternity, brother. They stressed fraternalism. They stressed brotherhood. This was the whole selling point of Sigma Alpha Rho.
My first experience with Sigma Alpha Rho, and it was a delightful experience, and it was the foundation of all of my subsequent work.
Must save Sigma Alpha Rho. It's not allowed to die. Of course, from a very sentimental side, and a very little told side of the story, I made her Rathbot a promise because she asked me for a promise. Irv said to me, Whitey, take care of this fraternity. I want to come back to Sigma Alpha Rho. And I promised him I would. I don't think I've ever let him down. This is Sigma Alpha Rho. This is what makes it.